is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on AFR Talk.
Hi, and welcome back to this Monday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. My name is Brian Fisher, congenial, convivial, and amiable as always as your host. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. Now, we've spent a fair amount of time focusing attention on this Senate primary race in the state of Mississippi, hotly contested between Senator Thad Cochran and Chris McDaniel. This race is not over. Chris McDaniel has teams of people today. As you and I are speaking here, talking together on the radio, Chris McDaniel has teams of people in county courthouses and polling places looking over the polling books, examining to see if there are invalid ballots. Now, they've identified 4,900 ballots about which there are genuine questions about their legitimacy. And they've got 31 counties still to go, a lot of those in the Delta, where the African-American turnout was the heaviest. If they get to 6,700 hinky ballots, then I think there's virtually no question that a subsequent another election needs to be called in the interest of fairness and justice and all of that. Now, there's another issue that's roiling this race, and my next guest, Rick Shaftan, is here to talk about that, and that is the mysterious allocation of $175,000 by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Now, I need to be clear, this is not the Cochran campaign. This is the National Republican Senatorial Committee. These are the fat cats in the Republican Party. These are the big tent Republicans. These are the ruling class Republicans. These are the GOP elites. These are the establishment Republicans that are behind this. And right now, they've got $175,000 that right now is not properly accounted for. And here with me as a guest to talk about this is Rick Shaftan. Rick is a senior analyst at Neighborhood Research Corporation. Rick has been a guest on this program before. Rick, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thanks for having me on today.
All right, Rick. Now I'm looking at this filing report on the pages of the FEC, National Republican Senatorial Committee. You get to the bottom of page 2, and it says that we got $175,000 in expenditures. This money, according to the form, the payee was something called National Media Research Planning and Placement. So, Rick, I want you to talk to us about where this $175,000 went. Who is this National Media Research Planning and Placement outfit? What was done with the $175,000 that was given to them? What kind of questions does this process raise in the minds of clear-thinking people?
Well, National Media is a big media buying firm. They work for establishment Republicans. And what happens is they'll get paid a sum of money. They place the ads on stations. And they have to file certain paperwork that anybody can walk into the station and examine, which some volunteers in Mississippi had done and gotten some of this, and it led to finding lots of ads that were placed from a group out of the exact same office of National Media. Nobody's seen any ads from the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Nobody's heard any ads. I've checked around with TV and radio stations around the state. No one's had an order from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, but they have gotten an order from another agency with a similar name. Instead of it being National Media, it's American Media, out of the exact same address, on a lot of African-American stations throughout the state with ads that they certainly wouldn't want their donors to hear. The people who listen to your program and send $5 and $10 and $25 and $50 to defeat Harry Reid, they don't want those folks hearing these ads because they're pretty vile.
So the solicitation was help us defeat Harry Reid, give us money so we can defeat Harry Reid. This money, $175,000 of it, was shipped into Mississippi to produce ads that a lot of the donors to the National Republican Senatorial Committee would find offensive. And I think we have one of those, Jeff, if we can cue that up. Here's one of the ads that Rick Shaftan is talking about. $175,000 of Republican elite money apparently going to produce an ad like this.
This is Bishop Ronnie Krupp of All Citizens for Mississippi, encouraging every registered voter to go out and vote on June 24. We're in critical time, which means we must make tough decisions. The issues do not just affect Republicans, but they affect every citizen. A victory by Tea Party candidate Chris McDaniels is a loss for the state of Mississippi. It is a loss for public education. It is a loss for the healthcare industry of this state, for the farm families and agriculture. It is a loss for Ingalls and the ship industry, for our military bases. It is a loss for the citizens of this state in a time of natural disaster, for our public universities and particularly our historically black universities. A victory for Chris McDaniels is a loss for the reputation of this state, for race relationships between blacks and whites and other ethnic groups. Mississippi can't afford Chris McDaniels. We cannot afford the price of inexperienced, untested, disconnected leadership. Billions are at stake. On June the 24th, go out and vote for Senator Thad Cochran. This ad was paid for by Political Action Committee, All Citizens for Mississippi.
Okay, so obviously a racial tint to that ad. Chris McDaniel, as is typical with a lot of these radio ads, accused of being a closet racist. If Chris McDaniel is elected, this is going to be devastating to the cause of black education in the state of Mississippi. It's going to reinforce racial stereotypes for the state of Mississippi. So basically painting Chris McDaniel as kind of the incarnation of the KKK. You vote for Chris McDaniel, he's going to be wearing a white hood on the Senate floor. And all that kind of stuff. So, reprehensible race-baiting ads. Now, the question then, Rick, and what you're saying is that it's typical if you buy radio ads, National Republican Senatorial Committee, if they buy radio ads, if that's the purpose of this money, then when you get to the end of the ad, the law requires that the identity of the organizations that's producing the ad be identified. So there ought to be some ads out there somewhere floating around that say this ad paid for by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So far, we can't find any of those ads, but we find a lot of ads coincidentally popping up at about the same time from this outfit called All Citizens for Mississippi. So All Citizens for Mississippi. Now, you would think, Rick, as I understand it, they've got some obligation to report what they've spent money on and where it came from. What do we know about that?
We don't know anything because they haven't filed anything. And what makes this ironic is that this fellow John Farrell over at American Media, even though you can read his bio on the national media website, John Farrell actually claims to be an expert on FEC compliance. And this ad actually itself doesn't even comply because the paid for line should be paid for by All Citizens for Mississippi, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee. So it's in violation just because of that. And this is coming out of a big national media buying firm that the same day they placed these ads got $175,000 from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, specifically earmarked for use in the state of Mississippi to run ads for Thad Cochran, not against Chris McDaniel. So there's a lot of fraud here. When you send a document to the Federal Election Commission that contains a lie, that is criminal fraud. People go to jail for that. It's wire fraud. It's the equivalent of mail fraud.
So the bottom line here, talking here with Rick Shaftan, who is our guest on the program. He's a senior analyst at Neighborhood Research Corporation. And you point out that this John Farrell, I'm looking at an excerpt from his biography right now, John ensures that every penny allocated for media is spent according to election law. So he knows what the rules are. In fact, he brags about it. That's part of how he entices people to give him money. I know exactly what the rules are. I know all about the election laws. I know exactly what taglines have to go on these commercials because I'm the guy. I'm the expert. Give me your money, and you make sure we don't run afoul of any election laws. But what's happened here, from what you're saying, Rick, is the money went from the NRSC to the national media outfit run by this John Farrell guy. $175,000 goes to this company, and we don't see any ads coming out of it, no ads coming out of national media, except for these All Citizens for Mississippi ads, and that group has never, ever filed any of its required FEC reports. Now, that starts to verge into criminal conspiracy territory.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to actually say that. You look at the players who were involved, high people in the state and national Republican Party, and your brain says these people can't be committing criminal acts punishable by long stretches in prison. But that's what all this evidence seems to indicate. And there's so many other things that have gone on that are way outside the scope of this conversation. It's at some point they're just going to have a new election here.
Now, Rick, there's also some FEC rules that prohibit any kind of coordination between a party committee like the NRSC and outside groups like All Citizens for Mississippi. Aren't they expressly prohibited by FEC rules, Federal Election Commission, from sharing vendors and from coordinating efforts?
Yes, they are. And I actually had to turn down some work this year for the Dave Bratt campaign because my company had done independent expenditures against Eric Cantor a month earlier. Now, I wasn't even doing anything at that time. I probably could have done it and found some legal way to do it, but you have to be careful here. This is serious stuff. So somebody else did it, and it worked out, and he won the election. It was great. But this is all too close. And they may claim there's a firewall. Nobody believes this. This is just stuff for people who are just so gullible. But anybody in politics knows that that's a lie.
So it looks from the surface again, and so I would say the bottom line here, Rick, is we need some serious explanation from the National Republican Senatorial Committee. We got just about 90 seconds left, but they've got some serious explaining to do because it looks on the surface like this $175,000 did not go to buy ads that they produced that had their tagline on them, but were sort of laundered into this All Conservatives for Mississippi to produce these race-baiting ads that most Republicans would find offensive, and this All Citizens for Mississippi, they have failed to comply with any of the FEC reporting guidelines, which is criminal behavior in and of itself. So I'd say bottom line this for us, Rick, seems minimum we need to have some serious explanation from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, possibly followed up by some kind of investigation and maybe even prosecution.
Exactly. I'm just outraged by this because there's a lot of good people that give money to the Senatorial Committee. They want to elect good conservatives and Republicans, and this is how their money is spent. And the people who spend their money laugh at these donors. They laugh at them, and it just disgusts me.
Now, Rick,
absolutely disgusts me.
One last question. Do you think there's going to be any more information that's going to come out? Got about 30 seconds. Do you see any more information coming out that's going to continue to make the National Republican Senatorial Committee look pretty bad here?
And a lot of other people. These stories are backed up like traffic trying to get on the one lane of the George Washington Bridge. I mean, there's stories that are going to come out all week. Things that we're finding. We haven't even gotten to all these stations yet to see what people have put on the air. And we've got volunteers going around Mississippi, going to these stations, and stations have actually been fairly cooperative, getting us information, as they were required to do. But let's see what happens. Hopefully justice will win out here, and there'll be a new election.
Well, and that's what we want. We simply want the truth to come out, the truth to be established, and justice to be done. Rick Shaftan, my guest, Senior Analyst, Neighborhood Research Corporation. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Focal Point, AFR Talk.